Welcome everyone to Lafayette College's Parent and Family Town Hall. We're very glad to have you here with us today. I'm Amy Blythe, Director of Parent and Family Relations at Lafayette. We're very pleased that you're here with us, and we're happy we get to connect with you in this way, virtually on Zoom. I just wanted to let you know straight off the top that this is being recorded, so you will be able to view it in its entirety again. And that will be posted on the families.lafayette.edu website tomorrow. So keep an eye out for that. And if you miss anything, you'll be able to view that again starting tomorrow. We have a great turnout here today. My understanding is we're over 700 family members. So thank you so much. We're so glad you're here. We really appreciate your enthusiasm joining us today so we can share information with you. Many of you submitted a question when you registered for this event, which we then took a look at, and utilized to be able to inform today's presentation that we've developed for you. If during the presentation or towards the end of it, you have a new question that you didn't ask before or that is not being answered, you can utilize the Q&A feature. So on the bottom of your screen, if you hover there, you'll see the Q&A feature. It'll allow you to type in a question. We have a team keeping an eye on those for us this afternoon, and we'll answer those as time allows, and if they haven't been answered already. So an overview for the session is we'll start with the presentation from President Byerly, Vice President Diorio, and Provost Meier, and then we'll go ahead and jump into the Q&A session, get to some of those answers you're looking for. So let's get started. Allow me the honor of introducing Lafayette College President Alison Byerly.
Thank you very much, Amy, and thank you everybody for being here. It's a pleasure to be able to connect with so many of you that we've heard from and those that we haven't heard from over the last few months, and we really appreciate your taking time to be with us today. And I should know that Amy, in speaking of a presentation on the part of all of us, perhaps exaggerated the degree of formality. We will have a few minutes of comments from myself and from Annette and John, and just a couple of slides with a little bit of information, but then we want to join you in questions and answers and get into a more spontaneous back and forth, although I think all of us who've participated in large Zoom calls know the medium is a little bit challenging for that. But we hope that, especially since many of you took the time to send questions in advance, we're going to try and address some of those in our kind of opening comments, and then we'll be able to hear directly from you. Really appreciate you taking time to be with us at what is such a busy time for everyone, and what has been really, truly extraordinary time for the college as well as for the whole country. I think when you think about the dizzying range of events that have occurred, the crisis that we were already working through with coronavirus, then the events of the last few weeks, which have been really a moment of pain and reckoning for the country. All of that, I think, has had a tremendous impact on the college, on our students, faculty, and staff, but also has reminded us of why we exist as an academic institution, to try and help address challenges, to try and create opportunities for conversation. We're very good at self-reflection and self-criticism, and we certainly expect that the coming months will give us lots of opportunities to think about how we can become stronger as an institution. One of the things that's been really interesting about working our way through the set of challenges presented by coronavirus is that it does actually require us to look very carefully at our priorities as a college. What are the things that are absolutely most essential for us to provide for our students? What are the things that are absolutely most critical to a Lafayette education? How can we focus on those things? And it's been actually kind of inspiring to see the way in which the community has come together to try and do that. One of the things that is striking about the nature of this particular crisis is that, for an academic institution in particular, this level of uncertainty for all of us, I think, is especially challenging. If you think about what draws us to the world of academia, what you love about the college experience, whether you're a student or a faculty or staff member or a parent, participating through your child's experience, there's something about the rhythm and the regularity, the ritual and the tradition of academic life that is extraordinarily reassuring. And for that reason, I think in many ways it felt especially unsettling for our community to be put in a position of having some of those rugs pulled out from underneath us and suddenly not knowing when commencement would happen, when we would be able to bring students back, exactly how classes would operate in the spring. Having that kind of uncertainty is really new. There's a lot about it that is confusing. There's a lot about it that's actually energizing, but it's something that I think we all have to sort of grapple with, even as part of this conversation, a recognition that there are still a lot of unanswered unanswered questions, and that many of the things that we're thinking about and doing are very dependent on external factors. And we're pivoting as quickly as we can to try and meet those external factors head on and to work with them. But we do recognize that everything we say today could seem a little bit different in the context of how circumstances unfold a month from now or 2 months from now. And so we ask your patience as we do our best to elaborate on the plans that we've already presented through the memo and website release last week, and hear your questions, but also just kind of grapple with, in some ways, the uncertainty involved in doing our best to create some structure in a sort of formless situation. I think one of the questions that has come up, certainly in individual conversations, and a couple of you wrote this in, has to do with how we go about thinking about the fall in general, and what led to our decision to present the plan that we presented last week, which calls for being largely on campus for most of our community, recognizing that some people may still need to study remotely, some faculty and staff may still need to work remotely, but our hope and our goal is to gather everyone together as a community on campus. That's not a decision that we take lightly. It's something we give a lot of thought to, and it's something that is certainly subject to reconsideration if circumstances require it. But I think that one of the things that we heard very clearly over the course of the spring was that everyone recognizes the difference between the very best one can do in offering an online experience and the different kind of environment and experience that's offered when students are together, when students are with faculty, when we're all convened as a community on campus. That is the gold standard to which we aspire. It's what we're trying to bring about, and it's something that we hold very dear. And in some ways, it was very reassuring to see how much students cherish that experience as well. One of the questions that was sent in advance was somebody asked simply, why are you so sure it's a good idea to open? And I would have to say very honestly, as of today, we can't guarantee for sure that we will still think it's a good idea to open on August 17th. What we do know is that if we don't prepare to open, there's no chance that we could open on August 17th. And right now we have lots of optimism about both the steps and preparation we're undertaking, about the progress of all of the planning that is designed to create the safest possible experience on campus. And there's a lot that we also just have to watch unfold over the course of the next 2 months as we see what the surrounding context looks like, what the rest of the world looks like, how people are operating elsewhere in the country. All of those things will have an impact on what actually happens August 17th as we prepare to start classes. And so we think of all of our decisions as directional. We're moving in a particular direction. We think we see where we're headed, and we know where we want to land, but we can't guarantee that circumstances won't require moving in a slightly different direction. And if that's the case, I think we proved in the spring that we can pivot pretty quickly. And I think that we're really laying the groundwork now for lots of options on everybody's part, and lots of opportunity, to think carefully about the plans that we're making. Finally, before getting into some of the nuts and bolts of the plans, I would say that one of the things that has been most helpful, certainly to me, has been to hear a lot from students, from families, as well as from our own faculty and staff about the experience of this spring, what worked well, what worked less well, what we can improve upon, what we think of as the kind of fundamental pieces of information that we gathered about the academic experience. And I think that I've been part of some wonderful conversations with faculty and administrators about those experiences, and both what was valuable in them, what we can improve in them, and also how critical it is to think intentionally about creating a sense of community among students, faculty, and staff, in wherever they might be when we reconvene in the fall, because we recognize that that sense of community is really crucial to the education we offer. It is not simply a matter of sitting in front of a computer and receiving information. It's a matter of the personal contact between different members of the campus community that makes it come alive and that makes the education valuable. And that is what we are certainly striving to recreate in all the plans that we've outlined. So with that as a bit of a preamble, I'd like to call first in a moment on Annette Diorio, who's our Vice President for Campus Life and really the sort of chief architect of our health and safety plan and overall implementation plan. And she'll talk a little bit about that. And then she'll be followed by our Provost, John Meier, who heads up the academic program. And he'll talk a little bit about the academic experience we're anticipating. And so I see that we're already working on getting Annette's slides up here for us. So Annette, if you would take it away.
Thank you very much. And it is really great to have so many folks on this call today. I know we want to leave time for questions, and I know many of you have questions. So let me start by saying, being very honest with you, every college, no matter what plan has been crafted, comes up with new questions to answer every day. We're all watching case counts, we're watching changes in areas, we're watching best practice emerging from other places, how the aggressive restrictions are morphing into sort of a more relaxed state. we try to project from that what the fall will look like. But realistically, as Allison said, we're planning and optimistic and moving in that direction, recognizing that things could change. We have crafted a comprehensive plan to reduce risk, and I'll run through a couple of the key elements in a moment. We have overlaid various strategies to improve our odds of keeping everyone healthy, but we're aware that no matter how much we plan, these remain uncharted waters for the entire world. As a quick summary, we landed on a strategy to do initial population level testing for all students because of three things. Our students live in close proximity to each other. They're less likely to show symptoms or have very mild symptoms than older adults. And with the kind of spread rate that COVID has, a week or two of unchecked illness in the community is really untenable. So we've paired the initial testing strategy with two additional testing mechanisms for active disease: the ability to do rapid testing on site for any member of the community with symptoms, and ongoing monitoring testing. As we learn more, our strategies continue to be refined. And I'd like to take 1 second to give a really huge thanks to both local hospital networks, St. Luke's Health Network, who is our partner provider, providing health coverage for our students at night and on the weekends, and Lehigh Valley Health Network, whose infectious disease specialists, along with the state epidemiologists, have been working really well with our college physician to help us make course adjustments to our testing strategy as new information and approaches develop. We expect every member of the community to check symptoms daily. We have a piece of technology to deploy to have students, faculty, and staff answer the questions from the CDC. Each day it clears folks to go about their business. This again is not perfect, in fact, because for some students, they may not realize that muscle aches are in fact symptomatic, or something that I did that was strenuous yesterday. But it is a good tool, really good tool on the staff and faculty side, and also a good check for students to just be aware of how they're feeling every day and to answer these questions, and for us to be able to intervene quickly if they are showing some symptoms. We have also been busy training contract tracers, plan to have a small network of contract tracers on campus. I've been working with the local and state health officials on that. And we have an additional piece of technology that will assist in that process. We did opt out of Bluetooth-enabled apps. There's some those are only really good if every single person uses them, and they can really flood you with data. But we are using technology to streamline our connections between the contact tracers and the folks who may be impacted. And we have built up our capacity to quarantine and isolate students who may become ill or who may have been close contacts of those who are ill. The most important piece of our strategy, though, is really what students, faculty, and staff will do to protect themselves and others. Wearing masks in class and inside other public buildings, washing hands, not touching your face, staying a little further away from each other, staying home if you feel ill. All of the things that individuals can do to help keep the disease from spreading are really critical and embedded in every college. When you look at their strategy, that is really what's embedded in there. You'll see some of the work of our communications folks with our some of our publications there on the slide with our leopard wearing his mask. Now, I'm sure you're thinking, so what kind of life does that mean? Does this mean going to class and going right back to your residence hall? It really doesn't for us. We still plan to have social events for students. Some might be outside, some might still be virtual, some might be in smaller groups than they would have been, but students will still meet people, spend time with friends. It does mean rethinking our residence halls more as family units, and we'll still have the things that you have when your son or daughter starts college, orientation for new students. Groups may be smaller. We may be doing some things ahead of time. Move-in will certainly look a little bit different, as we will be spacing students out to do the testing. But creating bonds for students is still really important. Also, you may have seen yesterday or heard more recently that the Patriot League is focusing on bringing student athletes back when all students arrive and delaying most of their competition into the fall. We know the importance of the athletic experience for the 20% of our student body that participates at the varsity level, and the additional 25% who play club sports. But really for them to focus on returning to top physical condition after this long break and staying closer to a home campus for a period of time is really a good decision for not only them, but the entire community. I know a lot of the questions that came in initially were about housing and dining. We are reducing density in both of these areas. Dining is deploying tents. We are not deploying tents in the housing side, but we have eliminated any overflow triples from our inventory, which was about 100 rooms last year. We are selectively reducing density in some other locations, allowing students more flexibility to commute if they wish. We're using partitions in bathrooms between sinks, monitoring usage with extra disinfection teams, keeping up with the usage there. Dining is changing service hours to reduce weekend density, adding more to-go and mobile options, and has an entire COVID safety plan of their own in terms of cleaning and density protocols. I will say there that we're following what the state guidelines have provided for us, also informed by the CDC and other organizations like ACHA. I know the guidelines vary from state to state, and so some states may have come out, and I saw something in the chat, so I'll actually answer it, but some states have said students have to be in their own rooms. Pennsylvania did not say that. There are some advantages for students all being in their own rooms in terms of isolation or quarantine. It on the face may seem like it lowers folks' ability to be sick, but of course, because it's really hard to control students coming and going and visiting one another, a single room isn't actually a perfect solution to that either. So we will reduce the number of students that we have in doubles, even beyond what we were last year, but we don't intend for everyone to have their own room. When we began this process, I said my hope was to articulate very clearly to the community the many steps we would take to enhance safety and still deliver a positive experience. At the end, I want people to think about both what we can do and what they can do to make a decision and make a decision that's in line with families' comfort levels. We will continue to develop and enhance our plan as more information comes in. We'll refine it. We learn more every day, and we learn new strategies every day. So we feel like we're well on the way, but not finished in terms of planning. And that is where I will stop and turn it over to John.
Thanks, Annette. You left, it landed at a perfect place for me to take up my comments. Learning more, not finished, deal with something new every single day. That's exactly what's going on in terms of the academic division. We learned an awful lot this past spring. I know a good percentage of the people on this call are parents of students who were here this past spring. And that was a great place for us to be starting from in terms of getting ready for the fall semester. One of the things that we really learned is that the core of a Lafayette education, the core things that are really important to us in terms of what it looks like in the classroom, what it looks like in terms of student-faculty interactions, that really is a distinguishing factor. And that really has to be front and center as we're thinking about how to deliver the curriculum when the fall comes, right? So we've got language in our faculty handbook that calls for every class to be, quote, engaging, intellectually challenging, reflective, and effective. And that's exactly what we're looking for. We are going to be using a greater variety of modes of instruction. I've gotten a little tired of saying modes and modalities, but it's become part of the daily routine that shows up in almost every meeting that we talk about that. Some classes are going to be face-to-face. Some classes are going to be hybrid, wherein some meetings are face-to-face, but then that's complemented by remote activities and remote delivery of materials. And then there will be some that are fully remote courses. We're similarly working to develop the same sort of wonderful suite of student support structures and co-curricular activities that can be delivered in a similarly resilient fashion. So Scott Hall, our home for academic advising, and in particular the Academic Resource Hub, they're working very hard to figure out what are all the right ways that they can effectively engage with the students when they come back this fall, regardless of the particular moment that the student happens to be in. The Landis Center for Community Outreach, they are also similarly saying, what does community outreach look like in this context? And I've had some great conversations with the Dyer Center for Innovation. I actually got to participate in one of the classes on social entrepreneurship last semester, where we had lots of great ideas that the students had generated directly related to these sorts of things, and that was a lot of fun to hear. So all of those things we're looking to develop a fall that looks a lot like the fall that students would usually be experiencing at Lafayette College, full well aware that we've got to be instituting a variety of measures for physical distancing for the health and safety of the entire community. One of those aspects that we're done with the nuts and bolts part of it, we have gone classroom to classroom, looked at the configuration of the classroom and figured out what is the density that's safe for us to have in each of those classrooms. That's a real linchpin in terms of our figuring out what's going to be happening with courses in the fall semester. Annette mentioned tents, so there will be some dining tents, but we also have a couple spare tents so that if faculty members want to take advantage of good weather whenever that might come, they can have some class meetings outside, but in the shade. We've got a variety of things going on like that. If you're very familiar with the campus, we're looking to spaces like Colton Chapel as alternative classroom space. We similarly are looking at redesigning a variety of courses where we need to have those immediate faculty-student interactions like laboratories. How can we safely reduce the density there and still have the students have that laboratory experience that's critical to their education? We've got a great IT plan that in particular will really improve our ability to engage students who can't be in a classroom in that particular moment and will not have an interruption in their studies during the course of the semester. We're in the midst of all of this, like Annette was saying. Toward the end of July, we should have all the first year students enrolled in their classes, all the issues about which courses are being offered and which modalities should be completely solidified, and the faculty will be reaching out to the students who are enrolled in their classes to begin a conversation about what's the nature of the class that the student has been enrolled in. So what's going to be different in this fall versus this past spring? Well, we've got this variety of modalities, but what we've also got is much better infrastructure than we had when we unexpectedly needed to make a pivot to fully remote instruction. That's not a pivot we have to make right now, but it's something that taught us where some of our weaknesses were. We've definitely taken steps to address them, and frankly, I think a faculty colleague mentioned to me that this looks like the summer of workshops, because we've got a variety of discussions going on through our teaching center where faculty are talking about, it's actually the name of a book, Teaching Small Online. How can we deliver this sort of Lafayette College experience when we're using this variety of modes of instruction? Our teaching center ran a course design institute where dozens of faculty members were thinking very deeply and very seriously about how they were going to put together their courses for the coming fall, because they all are going to need a certain degree of redesign. And we've also got a whole bunch of what I would call nuts and bolts sessions for folks. How do you get the various bits of technology to work in the ways that you want them to? So we're energized. This is a great challenge for us getting ready for the fall semester in the academic division. But what we're doing is keeping our eye entirely focused on preparing for the fall semester.
Thank you, John. Want to thank all of you for kicking us off with that information. Just a personal thanks and a thanks from the community at large for the President's steady leadership, for Vice President Diorio's comprehensive calm in any scenario, as well, Provost Meier, for your own adaptability. We thank you for that. So these guys are working really hard on behalf of the students, and we appreciate y'all being here so we can share that with you. So we'll start the Q&A session. We have some that you had submitted in advance. Like I said, there was a question about, from a parent, how will you deal with students leaving campus during the semester, going home or away for any reason?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it actually ties into one of the ones that was in the chat that was about the New York Times article that college-age students are probably not great at buying into some of these strategies in part because, again, for many of the students, when they get sick, the illness is somewhat mild, so it's been hard for them to sort of get in their head that I shouldn't go to parties or I shouldn't go on spring break or whatever that case was. So we really do want, and we really are encouraging students to stick as close to campus as possible for at least the beginning part of the semester so that we can see what's going on in the community and in other places. We would like students to think about, you know, as we had during the summer, we have had about 200 students here. They have mostly stayed on campus. That doesn't mean they don't occasionally walk over to Wawa and get a sandwich or go downtown or something, but we have really discouraged them from traveling home yet. We did see that a few of them did in fact travel home for one reason or another, and we addressed those students by working with them when they came back to try to make sure that they were okay. And we in fact isolated a couple. So ideally for us, we would like our students to think of this as coming in the fall and staying for a little while, staying close to campus and not planning trips home. I think that would be in the best case for everyone. And as we refine that travel policy, as we get closer to the start of the semester, we'll have more information, but we really are focused on thinking this as much of a closed circuit as we can.
Yeah.
jump in and add some-
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to add that, Annette has done a great job of thinking with her team about what are the things that we can do to kind of reinforce adherence among students. And I think rather than just sort of throwing up our hands and saying young people are what they are, one of the things that we do plan to reinforce, and I'm making this speech because parents can really help reinforce this, is, we have heard very clearly from students, they want to be back, they want to be with each other, they want to be part of the community. I think we really can do a good job of communicating to them. None of that will work if they don't adhere to these goals. It's not a matter of, a stick we're holding over them or saying we're going to ground you if we catch you, off campus. But I think if we can actually help them understand through the research, the education, the information that, the whole system really will be successful only if the majority of people adhere to all of the protocols that we lay out there. I actually think they'll be very motivated to see the system succeed, because I don't think they would like to see everything fold up and have everyone sent home halfway through the semester. So, I'm hoping that will be an incentive for them.
Yeah, I know right when the decision came out, I got a text from a rising senior that I know and have worked with, and she wanted to know what would happen to her summer internship that was actually going to be going through those weeks when we're returning early. So kind of hand in hand with the question from a family member, many families have vacation plans. How will we handle students who can't get to campus for the early move-in? What I told the student that reached out to me was, just like it would normally be, you need to reach out to your professor and make those arrangements and have that conversation. So those kinds of student responsibilities won't change, but maybe Provost Meier, I don't know if you want to add something to that.
So I would actually say that thanks to the fact that we are improving our technology and our fluency with remote instruction, it's easier for us to manage a lot of those situations this coming fall than it ordinarily would be. I think every single faculty member is aware that for one reason or another, there will be moments when some students can't come to class. The easy example is there's a need to isolate the student for whatever reason, and for the health and safety of the community. And we're prepared for that. And if some of that activity is occurring in the first week or so of the semester, we're ready for that too.
Yeah, another question was, curiosity about hearing what the plans are, including what the threshold for triggering a return to remote learning. Like you discussed at the beginning that, we'll be watching various contexts. And so do we have sort of a threshold to trigger that potential decision?
I'll say a word and then I'll call on Annette. In fact, she and I were just having a conversation about that earlier today. I've been involved in a lot of conversations at the state level. There's a state organization called the Association of Independent Colleges and Universities of Pennsylvania, which is an association of all of the presidents of all of the colleges and universities in the state. I am now moving into the chairship of the board of that organization. So I've been involved in conversations with the Deputy Secretary of Education and others who are worked on the state guidance that the Pennsylvania Department of Education just put out. They're very aware that colleges would like to have a kind of clear understanding of what the state regards as appropriate protocols for those kinds of decisions. One of the things they do say is that they expect that the bar would be very different from what it was this spring when the decision was made, when everybody said, oops, we better shut up shop and head home. No one was prepared to react in any other way than we need to vacate campuses. I think the expectation is that it would be a higher bar that would be required, but really there are two dimensions. One is what is happening on campus, that might seem to present, a threat either to our own community or beyond, or does the surrounding community have an uptick of some kind in activity that leads us to worry about the presence of students on campus. And so looking at both of those factors, I think would be an important part of the conversation. And Annette, you could probably say more specifically how you think about that.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add is to say, actually, you know, in the spring, when every college in the country basically kind of sent all their students home in the same couple-week period, I don't think we actually thought about what the impact would be of sending a bunch of students home who might be sick, right? So if we see cases on campus, the concept of sending those students back into their communities or on a plane is really viewed differently now. And that's what Allison had mentioned about the what's going on in the state. The state has actually asked us to, think about what we would do if we needed to not have our students in the classroom anymore, but not send them home, what we would do if we needed to actually send everyone home, and what we would do for everything in between. So right now, Northampton County is poised on the cusp of going into the green phase for Pennsylvania. That means to me, if we're in the green phase and everything's operating, the surrounding community, our conversations will be with the local Department of Health and the State Department of Health. If our local case counts go up, we will be weighing whether the greater danger is to send all the students home and say, okay, now we're sending 2,600 students back to their homes versus keep them on campus and manage where we are versus something in the outer world. So if the Pennsylvania cases and the Northampton cases go up, then there might be a really good reason why we might want to send more students home. We actually had a lot more students who wanted to stay in the spring than we allowed. We ended up with about 225 students, and we had probably 500 or 600 who wanted to stay because they lived far away or other reasons. And we really were able to manage really well with the students who stayed on campus. And so I would be hesitant to have such a high bar to send so many students home again in the future when we can obviously care for them in our community. And again, our relationship with both St. Luke's and Lehigh Valley Health Network, who never really hit their capacities, even in the midst of the highest disease counts in both counties, we feel really comfortable with our health network's ability to be helpful to us there.
Yeah, and another question, Annette, was, do you recommend that students have antibody testing prior to coming to campus?
So the antibody testing is I read these articles, every day there's a new article about antibody testing, right? And
Yeah.
I had one myself because I was so intrigued. There isn't really a lot of solid information about what the antibody testing conveys right now. So really we're concerned, and our testing protocols are really focused on trying to catch active disease and to slow the spread of disease that way. But if students want to have an antibody test, they certainly can if their families want to. The other thing that we did tell students, and we will tell students, is for students who have been diagnosed and have recovered from COVID, they actually do need to have some communication with the health center, because there is a possibility with the sensitivity of the current tests that they could get selected and actually test positive again, even though they're not spreading any disease. So any student who's been to their doctor and has had a diagnosis, we want to hear from them, and Dr. Goldstein will be sending out some information there. The other thing, if I can just tack onto this, folks were asking in the chat, so I want to try to answer it. Folks were asking what happens first, how rapid are the tests, and what happens after the test. So the tests we're using at Move-In, the only students who would be tested in a rapid test format are those students who show up either as symptomatic on that day, or they have been in a high-risk category, so someone in their immediate family has been ill. The rest of the tests will be done at a local hospital, and the results will come back within 24 hours. Students will move into their residence hall. The object is not, again, to keep them locked in their room overnight. We're going to try to limit their movements a little bit in that first 24 hours. But really, the objective here is to try to see if there are students with active disease before they've been wandering around campus for weeks. So the fact that they're in their place for 24 hours, they'll be, we'll be moving around in smaller groups so that it's not to impact a lot of people if we get a couple of positive tests. If the students have a positive test that comes back at that point, we're gonna take care of them if the family cannot come and get them. Some families had said, I would wanna come get my son or daughter. I want them to be home with me if they're sick. If they cannot get them home, then we have capacity to move them into isolation and to keep them cared for until they're ready to go back to class.
Thanks. Yeah, there were also, some questions surrounding people coming to campus and students leaving campus as well. So how do you deal with students leaving campus during the semester, going home or away for any reason? Did we already touch on that?
We did, and the other part of that, I think, was what about families coming to visit the area, right? So again,
right.
if Northampton County remains in the green phase and folks are in their town in a green phase and people sort of drive over and people stand outside and have a conversation or do something, we're not trying to imagine that there's no world where people will interact with others. What we are trying to do is keep people out of the residence halls, keep people out of the inside of our buildings, who, again, we're trying to convey to students the importance of thinking of this like a closed circuit. So, a family member asked me and said, well, geez, could I drive to campus and, bring somebody cookies? And I'm like, that's not, we want you to think about what's right for your son or daughter and what's right for the community, where you're coming from, what they're doing here, and think about those things. And if the issue is there's no other way to do it and we can manage it outside, then we can probably manage those kinds of quick things. But we don't want large gatherings and we don't want folks coming into the residence halls because that sort of increases the risk for everyone.
Yeah, I know with the green phase, the threshold here in Pennsylvania is groups smaller than 250. So, that might alter some of our traditions in the fall, but hopefully that's just for this year and we can resume those traditions in the traditional way. But we're all, thinking of how to do things a little differently. I know there was also some questions about move-in. So that information was shared on the fall2020.lafayette.edu website the other day. So rising students, seniors, juniors, and sophomores will be able to go on to their My Housing account and select a time to arrive beginning August 10th through that week of August 10th. And my understanding is that they can start accessing that through My Housing on July 6th. And then first year students, class of 2024, you'll be arriving that Thursday and Friday before classes, so the 13th and the 14th of August. And you can find that information and more about the move-in on fall2020.lafayette.edu. There's an FAQ in the sidebar menu. So for the provost, do you have a sense of what percentage of the faculty plans to teach on campus versus remotely for this semester? And sort of also wanting to know about their plans to hold office hours.
So we are, I would say the honest answer is we are currently gathering that information. And I think like practically everything else, it's all got to come with a huge asterisk because what things look like in this moment versus what things look like in mid-August may be slightly different. So there will be a good number of classes that are taught fully remotely, and there's a variety of good reasons why that's going to occur. Office hours and a variety of other aspects. I think that like most things this fall, there's going to be a great mix, and sometimes that mix is actually going to be helpful. So having the availability of having some office hours be done remotely is a great convenience to students, particularly if they're in a very different part of the campus and they would rather just log in and ask a quick question rather than come across campus. So I'm afraid that's one that I don't actually have a really crisp answer to give at this moment.
Could I jump in, John, and add, this is a conversation on every college and university campus. And, if you've been following this in the media, you know that that's one of the real challenges of the situation is that there's a dichotomy between the perceived experience of students who may be less concerned and less worried and more anxious to get back. And of course, faculty and staff who are much older and in higher risk categories, including, folks who might have specific medical conditions, but also just generally being older. And so one of the things that we've been really cognizant of as we've done our planning is to try and be both as clear as possible with the family communities, which is part of the point of today's conversation about kind of what things will look like, but also give faculty, kind of a very clear picture of what things will look like so as to make them as comfortable as possible, where that might be a sticking point. And I think what other colleges have found is that sometimes it's something like 30 or 40% of the faculty end up electing to teach remotely rather than be in the classroom, for health, for reasons of, health or welfare. And I think that one of the things that we've tried to stress is even those decisions might change depending on the actual experience of both the area or, a person's immediate family. If, for example, a faculty member had a spouse who became ill, you wouldn't want them to come into the classroom and teach. So they would need to suddenly, become remote for the next few weeks. And so one of the things we've really been trying to stress is that the faculty are preparing classes that will sort of shift, modalities as needed. There might be faculty who start off remotely and then are prepared to come into the classroom later, or, the reverse might be true. And so even though we recognize that that's in many ways challenging, it also builds on one of the things we learned this spring, which is having personal contact as a prelude to the online learning made it go much better than if you had simply started never having seen the person before. And so a lot of the planning is around things like reducing proximity, where you might have a class that meets in person once a week and remotely twice a week, or variations of that kind. And so I would just encourage, as we gather this information and start to share it with families, students will get a better picture later in the summer of what their precise courses will look like. But I encourage you to think flexibly about the fact that all of these things are shifting and subject to change, but what faculty are focusing on is how do you build the relationship with the student, regardless of the modality, that gives you the same access to their understanding of the material and the same kind of impact that you would have regardless. And so, I think the majority of our faculty are very excited about seeing students again. They did not prefer teaching a computer screen to teaching students in their classes. So I think it will be a mix of things. And I think we'll all have to just kind of be as flexible as possible in understanding that everyone needs to work their way through whatever the circumstances are at the moment.
Yeah, and then, some questions as well about, so what happens if a student does get ill with COVID or the flu or something else? Will that affect their academics? Will they have to repeat it? There was also some questions surrounding attendance policies, if you could speak to that a little bit.
Sure, and I love the setup, because I think it's exactly right. So a student might have COVID, a student might have the flu. This is definitely not a situation where we want to do anything that would incent the student to come to the classroom in either of those circumstances. That is one of the great aspects of the preparation that we've been doing, is that we're really able to accommodate that. We would always accommodate that. If a student had a flu in the semester, if a student needed to have a medical procedure in the middle of the semester, the faculty already accommodate those sorts of things. We're actually in just far better shape at the moment to accommodate those than we have been in the past. Our absolute goal last semester was to ensure that students were getting an education that would allow them to meaningfully progress towards their degrees. That is a thing that we're still focused on, but we're even more ambitious come this fall. And that very much explicitly includes finding ways to give great support and keep the students who are in those moments on track as they head forward.
Yeah, and just, kind of on that same path there's a question, will there be more faculty interaction, less just leaving the students on their own to read and reply, that style of instruction?
Thank you. That's a great question. And it's one where I would say that the literature on optimal pedagogical strategies for teaching in a remote or an online variety are a little bit mixed. One of the things that I really greatly appreciate is our faculty teaching and learning committee, with input from a variety of sources, brought forward some recommendations that said, look, we all have now had a half a semester experience with some of this. We've looked at some of the literature. We've thought very much about the fact that our students and our faculty have chosen to be part of a residential college community, and that's for a large number of reasons that involve close faculty-student interactions, courses that are student tailored. They're not cookie cutter off the shelf content transfer courses. So we're very much aware of that, and we're very much aware that the synchronous components, as the jargon goes, the live real-time interactions between faculty members and students really is a critical component in a context like ours. The faculty committee recommended that we put that out as an explicit expectation of the faculty for this fall, regardless of the mode that they're teaching in, and that has now gone out as one of our explicit requirements, that sort of interactivity does occur no matter what the mode is for the course.
Thank you. So maybe shifting gears a little bit, I know in my work with parents, and both having had 2 kids in college, this question will be of interest to our audience. They want to ask about what the refund policies would be, if there had been any discussion about tuition and room and board for the fall, dependent on what the eventual plan ends up being?
I guess that one is for me. I will jump in and say, we have, when we send out our tuition invoices in early July, we'll have a full accounting of any changes in our current policy. We're currently expecting that, in the event that, for example, we were remote for the fall and students weren't on campus, we would, offer a refund of room and board as we did this spring. I think in terms of tuition, one of the things that we've tried to emphasize is that the kind of experience that we offer, even if it's offered in a different modality, satisfies the same requirements, meets the same goals. It represents the same investment of kind of time and resources on the part of the institution. And so we haven't currently made any change to our tuition policy. We'll continue to listen to, feedback we get from folks as our plans develop. But I think especially given that we're focused on, hoping that our primary experience is the on-campus experience. In some ways, I would say that one of the distinctions to think about is less between remote and not remote in terms of, is a student doing something online? That's maybe less significant than the on-campus versus the off-campus experience. So for example, if a student were taking an individual class, living on campus, but their class was remote for 3 weeks or remote for the whole semester, it would be a very different experience than if they're just sitting at home alone, studying without the surrounding activities, the surrounding support, the surrounding access to resources. And so, one of the things we've been thinking about is how you think about those different kinds of levels of experience. So we haven't currently made any changes in our tuition policy, but anything that we decide to do differently would be spelled out prior to our sending the invoices out. So at the point at which, you're actually, writing checks to the institution, you'll have a clear picture of exactly what you could expect throughout the semester, including contingencies. That is, if this happens, here's what our policy would be. Because we recognized it was difficult for everybody, including us last spring, to be responding to circumstances and then having to decide on a policy for refunds. We'll decide all of that in advance so that you'll know, when making the decision to enroll, that that's what'll be involved.
Thank you. I appreciate you answering that question. There were some more questions as well about the move-in, and definitely check out that FAQ questions about who will be able to who will students be able to bring with them. So they'll be able to bring 2 people with them only. So we're going to hopefully, keep the numbers within our guidelines. And if you don't find that information there, we're happy to answer those questions further. I do also have some questions about Greek life and Greek housing. If you could address that, Annette.
Sure. I did see actually in the preliminary questions that there were some about Greek life as well. So like some of our other buildings, there has been a slight move to make the Greek houses be slightly less dense, I will say. Folks are asking about recruitment and will that happen? And I think students are still planning to try to do this in a mix of virtual and very tightly controlled small group events. I see a lot of the questions in the chat that are talking about Greek life, and then there are also others about sort of students socializing and parties and other things. And there's a few things that I guess I want to keep in mind. If Pennsylvania and if Northampton County specifically is in a green phase, gatherings up to 250 are allowed anywhere, right? So we would encourage students to continue to use safe practices and practice physical distancing, wear the masks when you're around people, oh, by the way, we did order 2 really cool Lafayette masks for each student to have when they get here, so that we will be providing them with 2 really good looking masks to add to their collection. But, some of the events will be smaller than before. And certainly around Greek recruitment, one of the major concerns that I have is that there's a lot of, people are going back and forth all day long. So we've been trying to figure out how to make those smaller, how to rely on some virtual exercises for some of that. And the national organizations have been having the same conversation. But, within our residence halls and within our spaces, we're ramping up the cleaning. We're actually asking students to do this thing that is hard, but if you're gonna wanna be in relationships and get married and do these things eventually, good communication is great. So they're coming to us with good communication. We want that communication to get even better. Students need to talk to their roommates and to the folks around them and really to understand where they are. Like, we can enforce a lot, and we will, but we can't enforce everything, and we don't see students all the time. So really, students talking about the kinds of risks that they are comfortable with or not comfortable with, I was on a town hall with about almost 300 students a few weeks ago, and they were asking fabulous questions. They were asking questions about, how do we help keep our faculty members safe and each other safe? What can we do? But how can we still have a social life? So can we do things like this? And they were sort of like giving examples of smaller group activities. I think that's the way for students to really own this and to own not only the concept of their own social experience, but the concept of the sort of public health and community health. And I know student government is continuing to lead those conversations with students, and I want them to be a part of it. But in these areas, Greek life, club sports, other organizations, those are vital connections for students, and we don't want to eliminate them, and we don't intend to, but they may need to function differently in this sort of COVID environment.
Also had a great question about the resident advisors. Is there going to be any changes to RA training, RA responsibilities?
The Residence Life folks are beginning to start to have contact with the RAs specifically about the dates that they'll come back and what their training will be like. People have asked a lot of questions about sort of like who is going to be the mask enforcers on campus, right? So is it public safety? No, I don't think so. I think it's our community as a whole. So will RAs play a little bit of a role in that? Will they let us know if students aren't sort of doing the kinds of things that they want, of course, in the way they would in any other place? There will be, I'm sure, I'm 100% sure, some additional training for RAs about what they should do if there's a concern after hours, on weekends. There will be additional cleaning in the residence halls on weekends and other places. So there will be folks around that they can contact. And there is some other training that we will be providing our RAs, as we will provide to all our other employees, about staying safe and things that they need to do.
Yeah, and I think someone also asked, would the gym be open? Would the library open? My understanding is that yes, with social distancing, with, face shields for the service staff, that we will slowly start allowing those facilities to open. Is that correct?
Actually, the sports center is going to open in a couple weeks for the students who are here during the summer. So I'll again say, we had about 250 students who stayed with us from when the college sent everyone home in March. Those students have stayed remarkably healthy, all of them healthy. And that doesn't mean that they didn't get sick. That just means they weren't sick enough to let us know that they were sick. But, they were in good shape. They did not, in fact, stay in their own rooms by themselves. They were pretty social and pretty engaged with one another and cooking together and doing various things. So it gives me a little bit of hope for students being able to sort of manage in that environment. The gym will open with lower density. The library will have some physical barriers and some other things and some reduction in seating to take care of that. We'll sort of keep going as the state guidelines progress with what we can do. But again, we're just now starting to get into the green phase. I think it's this Friday, right? Or something, this Friday for Northampton County.
And some questions as well about study abroad, as well as will international students be able to return? My understanding regarding the international students is that that's dependent on their home country. So I think that's going to be a case-by-case basis. But do we have any information or updates about study abroad?
So first I'll confirm exactly what you just said. Our international students is definitely a case-by-case basis, and we've had a variety of individual communications, and that's going to be continuing throughout the summer. So at the moment, we do have study abroad programs. We've got study abroad programs in the fall and in the spring. I would say that we are appropriately cautious about whether or not the ones in the fall are actually going to be viable, but the last I heard, this is at least a week old, so things change. But last I heard, that was still there were still programs that were still interested in maintaining that conversation, and we've got a good number of students that have actually started the process for spring semester abroad also. So all of it, of course, is going to greatly depend on where is the world at the moment when decisions need to be made. And that's frankly just a little bit hard to predict at this moment, but those things are still rolling forward at the moment until we've got more clear information.
Again, kind of case-by-case basis, right? Depending on what the location is and the timing of it, et cetera. So maybe, John, could you also speak to how labs will work? what the thinking is for labs?
Right. So I would say that there's a great variety of creative thinking around labs. The key difficulty with laboratories is you're trying to not have the sort of physical interactions that are frequently the case in laboratory settings. So faculty members, department heads, program chairs, they're all looking at the facilities that we've got, thinking about creative ways to address issues of the labs. Some of them will just involve doing a variety of ways of having fewer students in the laboratory, the physical space at the same time. There are actually lots of aspects of the lab experience that don't involve hands-on beakers in that moment. And so we don't necessarily need those moments occurring in the laboratory room itself. There will be extra sections. There's a great variety of things that people are considering at the moment.
Well, and I'm gonna keep you on your mic here.
Oh, I thought there was a limit of 2 in a row.
Only because there's been a lot of questions about the hybrid classes. How will they work? How many will there be? Do we know? Those type.
Great. I would say, frankly, it's entirely an issue of degree. I would say that essentially every class will have some bit of hybrid activity involved in it. For many, it would just be the occasional video office hour or something like that. Some classes are going to be delivering a certain amount of content, not live face-to-face, and then having the face-to-face interactions. Some will be having some students in the room and some students not in the room. So you mentioned that we do have some concern about international students' ability to get to campus. Some of those international students may decide that the best course of action is for them to continue their studies by participating in a class while they can't be on campus. And so you'll have some students who are in the room, some students who are not. But it is quite honestly going to be a wide variety. It's one of the reasons why we want to have faculty, well, why we're having faculty members reach out toward the end of July to talk to everybody who's in their class to give them a good sense of what it is that's going to be happening during the fall semester.
And John, I wonder whether it might be worth asking John O'Keefe to step up to the mic for a second and talk a little bit about technology, because I think one thing to take into consideration is not only were we in the spring, planning quickly in the sense that faculty hadn't prepared their courses to be partially remote, but also most faculty had no access to campus technology. They were using their homes as their studios for doing whatever they were doing. I think we'll be in a different place in the fall. And John, maybe you would say a little bit about the technology investments that we're making.
Sure, thanks, Allison. So we spent a lot of the spring semester working very hard to help our faculty and our students get online. And we learned a lot from that experience that informed a plan that we now have to make some significant investment in some new technology and capabilities that we either had but not to scale or didn't have at all. So for example, we're deploying a lot of web cameras and other things into our classrooms so that remote participants can participate with in-person participants. We also are deploying camera setups to help with different lab kinds of setups that John was referring to before. Also working very closely with our friends in the arts and music to figure out ways that we can help deliver some of that content as well. So this summer, we're going to continue to work hard to both acquire new technology for that purpose, but also we're thinking about how our public labs are going to work. So there's lots of computer labs on campus and engineering in the library. And so coming up with good social distancing practices there, spending some significant time and resources developing a laptop program that will be made available to students as well, so that if students are quarantined and they need technology in their rooms that they don't otherwise have, those kinds of resources will be made available. And even in the case where students are remote, as in not on campus, we did a lot of work this spring to help support those students as well. And we've continued to purchase equipment that we'll have in place so that if a student has to work from home and has network connectivity issues or laptop issues or access to software, which was another thing, specialized software that's used in a lot of different disciplines, all of that will be in place for the fall. So we feel very good and very confident that we learned a lot from our experience in the spring, and we're taking all the appropriate steps now to ensure that whatever the experience is in the fall with respect to online or in person, on campus or remote, that the quality of the program that you'll receive will be Lafayette excellent.
Thanks.
Thank you, John. Appreciate that. We also had just a quick question and answer about the orientation service project, which takes place each summer prior to move-in. That's OSP to the students. And I've been told that that will be taking place. We did get that question. So make sure your students are in touch with their coordinators for that program for more details as it gets closer. Also questions about cleaning protocols. Will students have access to hand sanitizer? My understanding is we have hundreds and overreach of hand sanitizer stations, and all campus buildings will have hand washing stations, wipes in classrooms, etc. So those plans are being laid as well.
Annette, you look like you wanted to add something to that. Was there something about the POSP that was not right?
I think they are doing something with POSP, but I don't think it's in person. I think they're doing a virtual.
Oh, okay.
But they can certainly get in touch because one of the sort of the major concerns here is that POSP would typically bring a lot of younger children to campus, and we wouldn't be bringing anyone to campus for the camps that would go on usually during that thing. You know, both with POSP, with club sports, with other groups, they're sort of working out still their connections, so that the connection will still be there even if the activity might be slightly different. So athletics, varsity athletics has gotten gets its oversight from the Patriot League, and club sports each have their own individual thing. POSP is working both with the local district, the school district, and other folks to be sure that they're doing what's compliant there. So I did see something that they're planning on doing something virtual for POSP, but I don't believe it is in person.
Great, thanks.
Okay, well, thank you for clarifying, and that's why you're here, to set me straight.
Information changes very rapidly around here.
Yeah. And you mentioned athletics. I know that the Patriot League made an announcement yesterday, I believe it was. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that for folks who might not have seen it yet.
Maybe I'll just say a word about that before Annette talks as the athletics expert, but as president who sits on the Council of Presidents of the Patriot League, in fact, I'm chairing the council right now, have been very involved with my fellow presidents in thinking about the role of athletics for the fall. And so, as you can imagine, there was a lot of discussion with the athletics directors and the presidents about what the fall might look like. What was released yesterday was just a statement outlining the sort of principles that are expected to guide fall competition, and these were really took the form of a memo to the athletic director saying these are the sort of guidelines we'd like you to follow. The principal elements of those include that competition would not start until the end of September for the Patriot League. So any season play that was planned for August or September would not be occurring. Some out of league play might start as of September 1st, but any schools that Patriot League schools are playing, we would have to be satisfied that their health protocols are very comparable to our own in terms of testing, et cetera, et cetera. We would expect all fall play to end by Thanksgiving. And we would also expect that play would be limited to places that are within driving distance, that there would be no flying, and very few during the regular season overnight trips. And so schedules would have to be reconfigured to account for closer proximity, and there might be some changing of schedules to reflect the fact that there isn't going to be a lot of distance travel. So that might sound like a lot of technicalities. It's the work of the coaches and the athletic directors to make it all work, but there was certainly a shared commitment to having the most meaningful set of activities possible for students in the fall. And I think really what we felt was that it was so important that the campuses have an opportunity to sort of settle in and stabilize and see how things were going before we attempted to send athletes to other campuses. That was one consideration. And the other, which Annette mentioned, was ensuring that the athletes are very ready for competition. And so the other key element, which I might have neglected, was that student athletes will return at the same time as other students. We won't be running practices for students, weeks in advance of other students returning. Again, we feel it's important to have similar protocols and be able to maintain the same structures for all students so that we can ensure that we're really putting sort of the health and safety of the community first. Annette, what did I miss, or what would you elaborate on there?
Got it all.
Okay.
I know we have a strong partnership with the Easton community. I don't know if you want to discuss the town-gown relationship, but we've already been discussing with them that students will be returning, and I'm sure they're excited. There was a parent question about if they're, are being encouraged to
go downtown, or how we
accommodate students as well.
Sure. So much of this is contingent on what everything else looks like at that moment in time. But certainly our expectation is that, by not having a fall break and by ending at Thanksgiving, I think we're making it clear we don't want students to travel. We don't want them going long distances. We don't want them, leaving campus for extended periods of time. That said, I don't think we're going to tell them they can't go downtown to restaurants that are legally open for outdoor dining, say. We would expect students to observe all the relevant protocols. And in fact, we really want them to be models for the community. What we don't want, and what I think would be problematic, is if neighbors around College Hill or in Easton, see our students seeming casual about the health and safety protocols that we all know are important. We would like them to create confidence in the broader community that it's not a problem to have our students back. And so that'll be one of the reasons why we'll be emphasizing that, again, the success of our plan and our relationship with the town does rest on being able to not fall into the kind of stereotypes that, we referred to earlier of, the newspaper articles about, kids on the beach or, kids in bars in Louisiana. We would like to actually, not that there's anything wrong with beaches or Louisiana, but you don't want people to be, stuffed into small spaces. One of the things that we do want is for our community to feel confident in our plans as well. I've been in regular touch with the mayor. He and I have spoken a number of times, have seen him a couple of times downtown. One of the things that, he's very concerned about, of course, is businesses getting back on a good footing. And our community has tried to be very supportive of that. All of our local businesses and restaurants have had, gift card programs that we've all taken advantage of, have been doing takeout that we've all been trying to patronize. And so, we're certainly hopeful that Easton will get back, in gear as soon as is appropriate. And we would certainly like, our community to be, within reason, supportive of that. I think, though, one of the things that really remains to be seen is whether, as our students begin to, develop a sense of how they move around campus and operate, whether we can be successful in giving them, as Annette said, kind of ownership over understanding for themselves that small group activities, a couple of people going out, frankly, 2 students going down to a pizza place and sitting outside and having pizza is actually much better than 30 students crowded into an apartment for a party. So it's not as if going downtown is in and of itself a negative. It all depends on the context. It depends on the density. It depends on the protocols. And so trying to ingrain that in students, I think, will be probably more important than, blanket prohibitions about you can go here or you can't go there. I don't know, Annette, what you would say about that yourself too.
I think you've done a terrific job answering that.
The ideal vice president, the president's done a great job.
And, kind of along that same thought, there was a question about if there are consequences for a student not following the expectations for the semester.
Yeah, that's a great question. So many schools are not adding onto their housing or their code of conduct, we are also not. We have sort of like I don't want to call it COVID rider, but it's like a concept of here's the things that we've asked you to do. And if you don't do them, eventually it's a failure to comply kind of disciplinary progress. So we have a progressive disciplinary system. We would be, again, trying to encourage students to comply for all the right reasons. It's not really meant to be more of a stick. It's meant to be more of a understanding and a shared understanding of responsibility. We don't have, I don't know how parents feel, but I don't think you have as great luck of just saying this is just a rule, just follow it, as opposed to having students really understand and buy into why it's so important and why it helps them to get the experience that they want and keep the community safe. So from a public health standpoint, we really have begun, and the little, the little leopard with the mask on was part of it, but that's not the whole be all and end all of a communication strategy. Like, we really are trying to get students to understand their responsibility by, creating video opportunities for other students to talk about the public health pieces, to really help student voices themselves and to lift up what's important. At the end of the day, if someone is genuinely endangering the community with their behavior, just like if it's someone who refuses to follow the rules about alcohol or other things, then there are consequences for that. Choices have consequences. And if students want to consistently choose not to do what is helping keep the community safe, then we'll deploy our discipline system. We don't want to do that. We want students to understand the importance of what we're asking.
Yeah, and I know your team does such a great job of really connecting with students and building those relationships. So that's really important as well. Question that I can answer was regarding family weekend. currently, I mean, we started planning for that probably before the last family weekend was over. So Family Weekend is a program I coordinate in conjunction with a student-led committee of 12 to 14 students. So that committee started working in the spring, early in February. And I had a conversation with the student chair and executive chair last week after the announcement was made, and asked them to think about the potential that it might go virtual this year. I just think that all of our great parents that love to come to campus and celebrate that tradition with us, it's just not safe potentially for you and the students and the greater community. So that's in discussion. A final decision has not been made, but I've asked them to think about it, talk to their own parents, do sort of an informal survey, and think about ways that we could actually maybe make it something different and interesting, and you know, seize the uniqueness of this semester. So I'm not seeing any more questions come in at this time, and we have about 20 minutes or so. I've got some closing comments as well. I don't know if there's anything I didn't touch about that you guys are seeing in the comments that we should, it seems to me, scrolling through, that we've kind of hit all of the highlights.
There's one thing I probably should mention is when we talked about the strategy that would, you know, deploy monitoring testing throughout the semester as well. One of the things that we recognize is that we have to have staff to do that on hand, because the regular health center staff will be doing the work that they do. I don't know if it's not entirely apparent, but I'll mention again that we have an existing partnership with St. Luke's Health Network. They are a provider for evening and weekend care. You know, we are working with them to be sure that students have access. We have an actual agreement with St. Luke's that when one of our students is transferred or is transported there after hours, the health center, they get like a go to the head of the line pass for getting care. So that is, you know, those are ways that we're actually still relying on our existing health networks that are very strong to help supplement our healthcare. I'm sure that that is a concern. Our counseling center has also been really on point with thinking about stress and the ways that this is manifesting both in, you know, young adults and adults, and they are geared up and ready for the fall as well. And so a lot of these things that I think, you know, folks are mentioning about, you know, what is the impact of on the health center of additional strain, we have planned to add some staffing to take care of some of those things that we can predict. So.
Amy, if we're thinking about wrapping up comments, and I'm not anxious to kick people off, but as a teacher, I know that it's never a bad thing if you let the class go early. People don't usually complain. You know, one thing I just wanted to observe was, you know, this conversation is so different from any conversation we've ever had in the past with parents and families. You know, normally if I'm addressing parents, or Annette or John are addressing parents, we're talking about, you know, how students get along with their roommates, and you know, their nervousness about social life, and are they excited about their classes. And, you know, I recognize it's a strange thing to be in a conversation like this, and we're talking about contact tracing and health protocols and mask wearing and what happens if a student goes into quarantine. And so, you know, I'm sort of hoping people are making the kind of imaginative effort to sort of see the kind of parallel universe of, you know, there is kind of the moment we're in now, and there is what we hope to create in the fall, and then there's a future that looks probably not exactly like the past, but not like kind of the today we're in. It's very hard in the moment that we're all, you know, just kind of emerging potentially from being stuck inside so long, to sort of picture life on campus. But I want to just say one thing, which is the students on campus this spring, again, we're a small number, so I'm not saying it's entirely representative of the experience, but I will say I think they liked being together, even though they were wearing masks, even though they were observing social distancing, even though their lives were very constricted and they didn't have access to all the facilities. You know, I feel confident, based on partly, you know, being a parent of a son who was a senior finishing up elsewhere this spring, and what I know from talking with our students. I do believe that although this life will be very different from what they might have expected, and diminished in some ways, it will be, I think, an energizing and exciting one for them in their ability to finally, you know, kind of be with others and resume some of that sense of connectivity that they've lost. And so I'm just imagining that as a parent, you know, I'm sure you're sitting there thinking, this is not the fall I wanted for my son or daughter. You know, anybody feels that way. We all feel that way. But I hope you can also feel some encouragement that the kind of spirit of the experience can still be there, that they're resilient enough that I honestly believe that students together will be so much happier than students have been alone in their bedrooms or just with us, their parents, over the course of the spring, that what we are really trying to focus on in the planning is creating the safest conditions possible for as much of that experience as, as can be had. And I guess my final comment would be, when you mention the unique dimensions of this semester, there are things that are new and different that are better in this current universe. And the fact that we're having this conversation, I've never before been able to address, 500 parents in the middle of the summer to talk about the upcoming fall. That's just not a thing we've done before. So I think students have been pretty quick to figure out what are the affordances and the benefits, as well as what are the negatives. I think we should trust them to make the most of the situation and do the best they can with it. And so, I hope that with some questions answered, people will be able to encourage their sons and daughters to feel enthusiastic about the fall.
Yeah, and because we're going to record this, maybe watch this again with them so that they can hear the content as well. You might have to bribe them to do so, but so they're going to put up a slide with some contact information. If you want to do some follow-up, there's also a link to submit suggestions if you would like to do that. I just want to thank our panel, President Byerly, Vice President Diorio, Provost Meier. We really appreciate you guys submitting to this rapid fire Q&A, and I really appreciate the parents as well dialing in and suggesting comments. And here's the contact info. parents@lafayette.edu is the email. During business hours, you can call. That number is the Alumni and Parent Relations Office. We do have someone answering the phone during business hours as usual. Also, please access the families.lafayette.edu website. Make sure that your students are checking regularly firstyear.lafayette.edu. That website has a ton of information for them about requirements and deadlines. Eventually, you'll see they'll be seeing information towards the end of this month, early next month, about orientation. I know there were some questions about that. Those plans are being put together. I think it's going to be a hybrid online over the summer and then when they arrive as well. Also, fall2020.lafayette.edu, as I mentioned earlier, the FAQs were just added the other day about move-in. So more particulars about that to flesh out our answers to those questions. Also, just wanted to highlight to you that we do summer welcome events. Over the summer, we do those regionally. They will be virtual this year, but we're going to maintain the format of having alumni or parent host in regional areas. So we just added New York City. We're actually doing a couple of those. We contacted a family in Seattle is going to do one, Los Angeles, the Southwest, the Midwest. So you'll see invitations to those, and you'll be hearing from me throughout the summer through my newsletters, more resources. We're also going to put together a parent orientation piece that we'll make available to you probably early August. You'll be getting something in the mail from me in July. So I'll be pesty and you can reach out to me in the meantime if as needed. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
And audience.
Mm-hmm.
We appreciate everybody being here, and we'll be in touch in the weeks and months ahead.
Take care.